So we're here tonight with my friend Kimmie Stradling. Kimmie, tell us about yourself, what you're doing now, but also kind of, if you would, some history with camping and retreat.
Yes. So currently I am working at Ventura First United Methodist Church as the Family Ministries Director. But I've worked for the church for about 8 years now, off and on in different areas. So I've been everywhere from children's youth director to a volunteer to a program director for a camp in Pennsylvania as well. I think we calculated once, and I've done a total of 34 camps and retreats in my time. And that doesn't count everything that I've done as a camper. So I have a huge heart for camping ministry, a huge passion for it, and it's truly where I feel closest to God.
Well, where'd you get your start in camping?
As a camper?
Yeah.
Or a counselor? As a camper, I was a Colby. I went to Colby for 10 years. So I hit the decade. My graduating year was 10 years. And then I started being a counselor, and I hopped to many different places. I would do up to 3. So my limit was 3 a summer. And so I went everywhere from, Santa Barbara at the time to Long Beach now, which would be north and south.
So you're talking about district camps within the California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. And Colby, just for those who are not familiar, Colby is Colby Ranch, which is up in the hills above Pasadena, kind of simply there. And
where I met you.
This is true. So that's how we came to know each other, was with Santa Barbara District Camp. Now, as you say, things have changed a little bit, but you've done as well. Why is it that you've done so much in camping? What was it that drew you to that?
Camping always made me feel less broken. And camping was a pivotal point in me, I would say, coming back to God. I was very angry at certain things that had happened in my life. And camping was a place that I felt like I could genuinely be myself. I felt like I wasn't judged, and I felt very loved. And because of that, it stirred this passion to give that back to people that feel broken and lost, and find a place that they remember that they are loved. And I think it's contagious that I always go away from camp feeling like I was more changed than what I did for the campers. And I got the bug, and I love it. I love camping ministry. I love camps. I love, not as much, I'm not a camper, like a tent. So there needs to be a bunk involved of some sort. But I think it's the people more than the place. And that's how I've been able to move to different states in camping ministry. I've actually did a camp in Australia once. And so what brings me back to camping is the people, no matter where that is or how we find that.
There's different forms of camp and the camp experience around the country. In some places, there's sleepaway camp, where essentially it's the parents send the kids away for the summer to camp.
Mm-hmm.
They're in school during the year, they're in camp during the summertime. There are other experiences people have had, like with scout camp when I was growing up, that was like, you go there to work on merit badges. You go there to do your hiking, your swimming, your rowing, your canoeing, and biology and all of that. Environmental science was the badge up there. The camp experience that we have had within the church and within the United Methodist Church is kind of specific. There's a kind of a pattern that I know things tend to fall into, in that while some of our sites have, archery or have climbing walls, more often it's not so much activity centered. So when you talk about, getting the bug, and you talk about what it's done in that sense of being broken, how much of the spiritual development and what kinds of things spoke to you within that, specifically when you were a camper?
So I think you're right. My experience more is religious camps, and the camps I've been to have been more rustic, I guess is a good word to use it. I mean, I have done the giant swing and the zip line, and I really one day want to get to one that has a blob and a lake. That's always been my goal. But the camps that I've been to and the camps that have impacted me the most were the most basic and rustic. And I think that worked in the advantage. And I remember when I first moved to Australia, I had this incident that I kept hearing God's voice. And I remember I called my dad and I was like, hey, do you know people say they can't hear God? And I was like, and he's like, yeah. I was like, great, I can't get him to shut up. And he said something very wise to me and said that it wasn't that God wasn't talking to you before, but you were too crowded and cluttered to listen. And I think that's why the week at camp is so impactful is you take out the clutter and you take out the distractions and you take out the noise and you're able to be fully immersed in God's love. And the dedication that you give to God, I think makes God really excited because it's not that God is talking more at camp versus somewhere else, but I feel like camp provides you a better place to listen.
Okay, so was it, you know, as a religious leader, I always want to think that it was our great programming that really spoke. But I
Excellent
also
programming.
know that chances are good that people do not remember what it is that those who are leading say. And as I was taught when I was in a chaplain, when I was in seminary, it's we were told they will not remember what you say when you go visit them in the room, but they'll remember that you were there.
Right.
So I think it's sounding like it was a whole lot of setting the table, making the place where
Right.
God can speak.
Well, and the people too. Like if you say to me, you know, even a theme of the camp for that year, you're right. I can tell you a rough estimate of what we talked about. There's a few talks that really hit home to me that I remember. I'm not much of a journaler, so I can't really refer back to my notes. But if you bring up that, I bring up the people of that I connected with, whether it was counselors or campers. And even now I'm thinking back to who are the people to me that made camp. And I know it's a discussion often, especially since we have switched church up to be a very virtual setting, that it reminds us that it's not always the place. Don't get me wrong, I'm a hugger. I'm not a virtual person, but it's not always the place, but it's the people that show the love, that where you can find Jesus the most. And I would say that is accurate with camp as well.
So you had that experience. You then became, as often happens, our counselors are drawn from the ranks of the campers, became a counselor. And at some point in time, you left here and you went back east and was involved in camping there. What happened and how did that come about?
So yes, from camping ministry, I went to school. I studied at Northern Arizona University in hotel and restaurant management. And I did a couple camps when I was out there. And I remember I texted all my camp friends like, hey, I was just at a camp that had a train in their dining hall. And this is the Ritz-Carlton of camps. And that was exciting and great experience there. And from all that, I decided not to go into business and I became a youth director. And so I worked as a children's youth director for 4 years between 2 different churches. And ultimately, I got burnt out. I didn't have the resources at the time to set good boundaries. I didn't know how to fill my cup first before I filled others. So my cup was pretty empty. And it ultimately led to me driving down the 405 freeway, yelling at God, help. And I remember distinctly hearing, don't worry, I got you. And then I repeated like, okay, that's great, but I need your help. And from that, within a course of 48 hours, I found a way to move and live in Australia for a year.
Wow.
And I took on 3 jobs. I worked a ton, saved up money, and I left for Australia and I moved there. And this was kind of my getaway. And when I was there, it was one of those things when God laughs, you tell him your plans. Because I went from almost escaping the church because I was burnt out to I started volunteering for a church. And from that, I was completely renewed. And I remember I was in actually New Zealand on a trip, and I was riding on a bus, and I was looking. If you haven't been to New Zealand, I recommend it. It's gorgeous. Take a full month to do it. And I was driving, and it was like a crystal clear blue lake with the mountains reflecting off of it. And I remember looking at it, and it was like, if God spent so much time and love making this, he sure can take care of me. And how much love did he put into me? And from that, I started seeing God most when I traveled and when I got away and when I moved. And so I did Australia for a year. I came back, actually, I moved back to California, and within 2 days, I was up at Cedar Glens camp. And I didn't sleep that week because my time difference was really off. But hey, it was fun. I had a great cabin, and it just called me back. The minute I landed on American soil, I was called up my friends. I was like, hey, who needs a counselor? And that's when I went into negotiation with God again, which I don't recommend. But I said, okay, if I'm going back in ministry, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to work in camping ministry. So I moved to Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, a really small town out of that, which I wear flip-flops 364 days a year. So that was a culture shock, but I ended up working as a program director in camping ministry and living there. And it was an experience. And yeah.
And now you're back. You're
I'm back.
working up in Ventura. Turns out, I want to double check here. Did Matt hire you, or you been hired when Matt ended up being appointed there?
No, Matt hired me.
Okay. And just because of COVID and all, I know that you hadn't actually seen each other much in the time that you were starting off and working together there. But I just brought that up because Matt was one of our counselors in Santa Barbara District Camp. So, and he's
no, Matt actually called me he's like, hey, I have a youth director position opening. Would you like to learn more about it? And I was in Pennsylvania at the time and working for a camp, and I was like, no, I'm good. And then I came home and I was like, no, I'm good. And then 2 hours later, here I am. So one day I'll actually get to meet my youth. I look forward to that day.
In person. So I just observing what you've shared with me here is that you did a lot of retreat ministry, you did a lot of camp ministry, you got burned out on that, and you had to, well, okay, the little advertisement here, you had to get upside down, you had to go on the other side of the world.
I was actually upside down in Australia.
In order to discover again who you were. You were up here, you were asking God and you were getting some word of comfort, but you weren't really hearing direction. And going down there, I think you said that you couldn't get God to shut up.
Yes.
So you were hearing that direction. So even for someone whose work was getting away and doing renewal, it wasn't until you just turned everything upside down before you were able to really have that rediscovery of yourself and that reconnection. So I want to broaden the discussion then and talk about, you've come out of this, I don't want to say rigid, but this structure of what camping is. And it's something that is oftentimes just simply being rejected. You know, time for it, or with our camps, there are people who are uncomfortable with how rustic it is. And in your work with younger folk, what is it that people are seeking now for that renewal, for that time of getting to be with God? What kinds of things are people doing these days? I would say especially those who aren't directly connected with a faith group, in order to find themselves.
Yeah, I think actually camping ministry has hit the hardest on, I think the church as a whole is going through a change. I think we have realized that with COVID, that the structure of you're going to sit in the pew for an hour and you're going to be quiet, and then you're going to shake the pastor's hand and you're going to, join a small group, and the structure of church is changing. And I think camping ministry has been hit the hardest by this. that it is in a place, a pivotal place right now, that are you willing to change and adapt to what the people are seeking now, or are we going to die in what we did? And it is rustic, and there's a lot of people that's like, hey, I played with a rock, so you should play with a rock. We did this, so you should do this. This is how I found God, so you should find God this way. And I am the worst person you can get on board if you don't like change. I thrive off of it. I love it. I love trying things new. My first year of ministry, somebody taught me the word of fabulous mistake. And I thrive off of that now. Okay, just keep making new fabulous mistakes. And as long as we make new fabulous mistakes, we're good. And so I think people are still seeking to hear God. I think people are still seeking relationship with people. I think people still need help and still feel lost. And that hasn't changed. But how are we going to reach them? And that might be, there was one camp that we we did what was called hobo dinners. And you would cook your dinner in a tinfoil, and you put it in the fire. And we would have to light 5 fires in order to do that for the camp. And it started downpouring. And that makes it really hard to cook your dinner. However, the kids all ran back to their cabins, got into the most neon outfits they could find, and started dancing in the rain. And so that's what we did. We ran all the meals to the kitchen as quickly as we can, and we danced with them. And I always say, with young adults especially, if it feels like they're having a party and it sounds like they're having a party, you're having a successful young adult meeting. And so I think camping ministry can use that excitement, use that energy, and still be the inviting place that they want to see. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's great. I'm thinking for myself. I do not count myself among the younger people, but in terms of people with kids, younger in that respect, we have made a point of going camping with friends. We have a reservation at Yosemite this summer, and the way that we've done this in the past, we go to the housekeeping there, and able to get 3 different sites, and whoever is up there, we share common meals together, but the family stays together and does their own thing during the day. So if one family wants to go bike riding, or wants to go up to Mirror Lake, or wants to go over to the falls, they can all do that. And so there is, I don't want to say structured time, because it's not structured at all, but right, to have the common meal, and then to go off and be family time and come back together again. This is what I'm talking about, some creative ways of being able to be together and be apart, be structured and be free, right, and to discover what comes there. I know of folks who make intentional time, and being here in Huntington Beach, just to walk down and spend time, even if it's not overnight, but to spend time on the beach, and just to go and to be very, I think it's a matter of intentionality about time apart. So are there other things that you have seen, or other things that you have done that have spent this time apart?
Yeah, I think when you said the meals, it really resonated with me. I think people naturally join together over meals. I think that's where the best conversation has. Food is more than just energy. It can be therapy too, just from who's around the table. So I do strive that. I'm a big gather around the table. Let's have our separate lives, but come together. I also am a big sunset at the beach person. It's where I can re-still myself. It's where I can calm myself. I feel very centered there, as well as fire, not in a pyro way, but like a campfire. Some of the best connections that I have had and conversations with God have been at campfire, at camp. And I don't know what it is, but the calminess of looking at the fire, and I think stilling our hearts so we can connect with God. And we can be vulnerable in that. And so that's where I would seek, especially in COVID. If it's not in COVID, I am a traveler. I love my passport. I want to see, my goal before I die is to visit 100 countries. I think God made such an amazing world, and I want to enjoy every part of it. And so that would be another way that I get fueled emotionally and spiritually, is seeing God's beauty, whether that's on a hike in Yosemite, whether it's, a lake somewhere, whatever it is. I find great joy in that.
For you in that situation, do you do a lot of research beforehand, plan out your itinerary, understand the history of what you're going to see, or do you go and let the Spirit guide you in that? What
Yes, kind of. So I'm not the most planned out person when I travel. I have the plane ticket and I have the first night plan. So where am I sleeping when I land and how am I getting there? And that's kind of what I plan. And then along the way, you look at different sites and different things, and I'll add it to the list in my itinerary. But it's very fluid. I went to New Zealand for a month on a whim. I think I bought the ticket and I was in New Zealand less than a week later. And so I just kind of was like, all right, let's figure this out. And sometimes it was like, all right, when Bruno Mars was in Auckland and I couldn't get a hostel, it was very, let's figure this out. But, it's in between, not irresponsible, but I am not the tour group with the clipboard either.
Okay. Your history shows that you have certainly been times when you've been seeking something more structured. I'm struck by when you're on the 405 and asking God for help, and it's not enough to simply say, "I've got you." You want to know something more than that. So you threw everything up in the air and went to Australia. It and really put, I don't want to say put God to the test as much as it was open to yourself for what would happen there. So I think that's what I'm kind of looking at with what you're describing here in camping and getting a retreat, getting away, is finding a way to open yourself for that movement. So the balance of structure with that freedom that's there. And of course,
and I think it's different, right? Like if you are a camper and you get to go and experience, I actually encourage people to be more spontaneous, because you can plan yourself out of anything. You can talk yourself out of why this isn't a good week, this isn't a good time, I have too much at work. God is always there, so I'll get to him after I finish, the last season of whatever you're binge watching. So I think if you are receiving and you're looking to receive, I think that spontaneity is really good. I think if you're in charge, I am completely different. If I am in charge of the group at camp, I am the one with the clipboard. We have a schedule. Here's all the activities I've planned for you. So
I think that's great advice that you're giving there, is looking at it. If you're looking to get away, you need to get away. But also, if you're somebody who is ordinarily very structured, to give yourself some unstructured time. If you're ordinarily somebody who's structured, you want to have a basis so that you can know what you're doing. It's this article that I'm just discovered and recommending is recognizing that we need to have that balance within our lives, that when we get too structured, we need to spend some time unstructured. We're too used to one place, we need to go away from that place. And the pattern that they quote Rob Bell is saying, it's you have to go from orientation to disorientation before you can get to reorientation. You've got to go from order to disorder in order to reorder. That's Richard Rohr. This sense that we do have that movement. And, this is the time of year when we remember Jesus going into the wilderness. And we wander into the wilderness of Lent, this time of getting away, so that we can be restructured. I'll preach for a second. I think all too often that we think of Lent as being this time when we beat ourselves up and take on extra responsibilities, rather than letting this be a time of wandering and pondering. And so I'm looking to say, particularly now in COVID, in the pandemic, there's so much that we can't do I mean, you can run off to Canada, but you're going to have to sit in a hotel room for 14 days before you can get out and go anywhere else around and explore. And so this isn't the time necessarily for that. But what kind of things can people do?
Right.
And what kind of things can we as a congregation offer?
So to answer the question of what people could do, I think the first thing is what brings you joy, and then making joy the priority. So I get great joy of seeing the sunset on the beach. I literally live across the street from the beach, and there are times that I have found a way to talk myself out of, oh, it's far, it's cold, it's windy. And you kind of do, you get that COVID slump. I'm supposed to stay in my house, so why won't I? I don't need to put on any other article of clothing other than my pajamas. And so I think I really recommend people what brings you joy and then take that step. And where can we find it in a little way? And that's hard for me because Australia brings me joy and I can't go. They will not let me in. But what have I found that in Australia? Hiking was one of them. I love to hike now. So can you take a little hike? Can you go to the beach? Can you go on a drive? Can you build a fire if that's your thing? Do you like animals? Go pet a cat. I think setting yourself of finding those glimpses of joy. And some of that might be alone and it might be with the people that you're allowed to be with. But if you look at Jesus, Jesus wandered. Like, where did he go when people annoyed him? On a mountain, on a boat, on a lake, he was constantly trying to get away to center himself so he could come back and preach. And so if we're going to walk how Jesus walked, we also have to rest like Jesus rests. And he did wander and vacation and take some me time. And so find that me time.
So I think for the other part of that question then is what I'll let this be the jumping off point here, and to say to those who are watching here and participating in the discussion we're about to have, that when we talk about our own experiences, how we get away, I'd like for us also to have a discussion of what can we as a community do to resource one another in that need to get lost, so that we can reorient ourselves. Kimmie, thank you so much for spending some time with us. And I'm looking forward to sharing this with our Upside Down group. And we're here every fourth Saturday at 5 p.m. And on Zoom. You can find the information for that on our our webpage, which is cumchb.org. So we'll move now into the discussion time.